Hi guys, today we're going to do a slightly more advanced topic for Xojo users, and we're going to look at how can you share code between projects. Specifically, we're going to look at Xojo's ability to have classes and modules as external items to your project, why you might do this, how not to do it, and how I do it, and we'll go from there. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create two just blank projects, one called Project 1 and one called Project 2, and we're going to be sharing code between them. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make a desktop project called Project 1. I'm going to save it just on my desktop, and I'm going to create a new project called Project 2. Again, I'm going to save that to my desktop. Now shrink that down. So in Project 1, now I've got, what I'm going to do is we're going to make a maths module. Okay, we've got some functions that are sort of mathematics specific, and some classes that kind of come under, maybe vectors or things like that. So we're going to have classes and methods that we want to share between two projects. So how best to do that? Well, the most naive way to do it is to make a module, call it maths, and let's add a method to it. Okay, I'm going to add an is even method that takes an integer, returns a boolean, and if it's an even number, it will return true, or false if it's odd. So that's quite easy to do. We just do return I mod 2 equals 0. So if the number divided by 2 is, if there's no remainder, it must be even. So we've got this method. We'll go to the app, open event handler, and we'll just check it works. So result was boolean equals is even 2. Put a breakpoint in. It should say yes, that's true. Result true. Excellent. Just to prove it's not a fluke. Is even 3 should be false. It's false. Brilliant. Okay, great. So we've got a method that works. Now, first thing you'll notice, I'm using a module, is I've made is even global. That's not a great idea for encapsulation, because that means that even within the app's open event, I can just do is even. Okay, no prefixing, right? So it's in the global namespace, which is not great. Really, what I want to do is I want to make sure that that method can only be called within the maths module, or if I specifically say I want the is even method within the maths module. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set is even's property to protected. Now that means now if I try and do that, it's integer equal, so result is boolean equals is even, it doesn't come up in autocomplete, I can't use it. I have to say maths.isEven. Okay, and I like that. Okay, this maths method is now encapsulated in my maths module. So first things first, I tend to keep all module methods as protected. Right, now let's say I'm going to save that. I want to share this in project 2. Okay, project 2 needs the maths module too. How do I do that? Well, the most naive thing to do would be to select it, copy it, and go to project 2, paste it. Hooray! I've now got the maths module. I can use it in project 2. Isn't that great? It is, so long as you don't make any changes to the maths module ever. Either you find a bug, excuse me, and you need to correct it, or you want to add some more methods or classes. Okay, if I make any alterations to the module in project 2, they won't be reflected in project 1 using this implementation. And I'll prove that to you. Let's just add another method. This one, we'll call it isInteger. And what this will do is we'll take a double and it will return a boolean if the double is actually an integer. Now the easiest way to do that is, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, is return d equal floor d. So what that does is it says, okay, floor the double, so round it down, and if that equals itself, it must be an integer. We'll just check that works. We'll add an event handler here, and we'll go, let's say, result as boolean equals maths.is integer 3. Okay, that should be true. Hooray, it's true. Now let's put a double in there. That should be false. Phew, okay, that works. Great, so we've got this new method. We've got 2 methods in our maths module now. I'm going to save that in project 2 and go back to project 1, find the maths module, but it's not there. Okay, I don't have access to it in project 1, so that's not going to scale at all. So how do we get around this project? Well, what we'll do is we're going to delete the module from project 1. Okay, we're going to delete that and go back to project 2. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say to Xojo, hey, this module, I want it to be external to my project. Okay, I want it to be managed independently of this project. And that's really easy to do. All you do, right click the object, the maths module in this case, and go make external. Now, you can save it in 2 formats, the maths module, either XML code or as a binary code. I absolutely recommend XML code is what you should save it as. If you're using version control, which you should be, please see my other video on using Git with Xojo, why it's important to do that. Then basically you don't really have an option but to save it as XML code if you want to use source control. So make sure you save it as XML and pick a location. So I'm just going to save it on the desktop. Okay, so I'm going to go export. And now you'll see in the navigator, there's a little arrow over the objects, and that symbolizes that it's an external reference. The module otherwise behaves exactly the same. Okay. So now how do I get that into project 1? Well, we'll open up project 1, and the easiest way I found to do it is if you go to the Finder, find the maths module on the desktop, which is here, and then you don't just want to drag it onto the navigator because that will just import it. What I do is drag it and I press Command and Option, and can you see how the cursor turns to this little sort of alias marker? And then I drag it into the navigator, and boom, I've got a reference now to that module. So any changes I make to that module anywhere will be reflected in any project that's referencing it. So I'm going to save project 1. Now you can see, right, we've got, as we imagine, we've got both methods. Now let's add a third method and see if it's reflected. So this is what maths looks like in project 1, 2 methods. In project 2, the same. So let's make a new method, something brainless. Let's have is odd, okay? The opposite of is even. It will take an integer and return true if it's odd. So let's just do return not is even. That's the easiest, okay? It's just the opposite of even. And now we've got 3 methods. I'm going to save that. It's important to save it because unless you save the changes you make to the module, they won't be propagated, okay? So now when I go to project 2, you'll see we have the isOdd method in project 2, which is great. So any changes I make in one project are immediately reflected in another. Now you can commit the maths module using version control in its own repo, or you can keep it as part of the main project you're working on, and other projects can reference it, but you can commit it to version control, etc., which is fantastic. So that's how we use external modules. Now, there is, I don't know if it's a bug or it's just an oversight, or if it's how Xojo is just structured. But one thing that people like to do, myself included, is to have classes within a module, which is great because if you have a class inside a module, then it means that you can use kind of more descriptive names for your classes because you know they're protected by the namespace of the module. The problem with using external modules is that they can't contain classes. If I try and add a class to the maths module, I can't, right? I can't drop it into the module, right? It won't let me because it's an external module, so I can't put a class in it. And that's just a limitation with Xojo. which is a pain, okay? Because ideally, I want classes in modules, and I want everything external. Because you can have external classes. I should say you can have external classes. We've talked about external modules. It works exactly the same for a class. You can share a class amongst projects. So how do we come around? How do we get around this problem? Honestly, it's not an elegant solution, but it's what I've just come to accept is the best way, and it's what I use for all my projects, and I think it's the most sensible way moving forwards. And I'm going to show what I do. So let's go to project one. I'm trying to make a maths library, okay? I've got my maths library, my maths module, sorry, but I want some classes, okay? Specifically, I'm going to add a vector class, and I want that to be external. How am I going to structure that? How do I structure that? What I do when I'm making the library is first of all, I have a folder. Okay, that's the folder for the library. I'm going to call it MathsKit. Okay, and inside MathsKit, I'm going to keep all these external references. So I'm going to drag my module in there, and now I'm going to add a class. So I'm going to add just a normal class into my folder, and I'm going to call it vector. Now, I can just call it vector. The problem is, because I can't put it inside a module, it will be in the global namespace. Now that is fine, probably, but it means if you're sharing code amongst many people, if someone else has a vector class, you're going to have a problem. So you basically have to either prefix or suffix the class name with something unique. And what I tend to do is most of my libraries are something kit. That's just how I've always made them. So for MathsKit, that's MK. I will put MK in front of vector. It's unlikely someone else is going to have a class called MK. It's annoying, it's inelegant. I wish I could just have maths.vector, but I can't. I just accept that. So now I've got my MK vector class, I'm going to make that external. Okay, external. I'm going to save it again on my desktop. Right, it's not the best place to be saving. I'm going to save it as XML code, but I'm going to save that there. So now that is also external. How do I get that to show up in project 2? Well, you basically have to do what you did for the module. Now, when you're first setting this up, there's a little bit of jiggery-pokery, but I'm going to create a folder again. I'm going to call it MathsKit. It doesn't have to be, the folder is immaterial. You don't technically need the folder. I just think for keeping things neat and tidy in the navigator, it's important. So I'm going to drag that into there, and then I'm going to go to my Finder, to the desktop, find MK vector, and click it, Command Option, drag it to the navigator. There we go, pop it in the folder. So now I've got both of them, and they will update and they will reflect between the two of them. Why do I do it this way? Well, one thing I sometimes do is, very often when I'm making what I call a library, so all related functions that ideally would be in a module but can't be because Xojo can't handle external classes inside a module. So I tend to call it a library. I put them in a folder, and then sometimes the classes that are in that library folder, I'll want them to be able to access, there might be some sort of global methods that they'll find useful. So let's say, let's make an example. Let's add a couple of properties to the vector class. We'll add x as, let's say, just for argument's sake, well, make it a double. And we'll add another one, x and y. And we'll add a constructor that takes x as double, y as double. Now, there's no reason to do this. This is just to illustrate why I keep classes and modules within a folder, because I always rely on having a module with the same name as the folder it's in, because then I know for the naming conventions that, okay, any sort of module, any sort of methods that I need, or any extensions that I need for the classes that apply to everything in that module, in that library, can be found in a module with the same name as the folder. Okay, so so let's say you can pass a double and for x and y as the constructor, but I'm I want them to be integers. Okay, I could actually just make these integers, but just to prove my point, I'm going to enforce it. So I'm going to say, let's check that x and y are integers. Again, this is stupid. I could in the constructor just stipulate that it takes an integer, but bear with me. So I'm going to say if maths dot is, if it's not an integer, maths dot is integer y, then okay. So if both of them are not integers, then let's just raise an exception. They should be integers. Okay. Now this is important because I need a global method called isInteger, which I could put on the class, on the vector class, but actually I've already defined it somewhere else. Okay, it's a useful reusable method or function, so I need a module to hold it within. So that's why I always have a module with the same, either the same name, in this case I'm calling it maths instead of maths kit, but with a similar name to the library folder it's in. That's just a personal preference of how I do it. Anywho, that is, so we'll save that. Let's save that. And then if we go back to project 1, just to illustrate that they are updating, and just refresh it, there it is, methods, the constructor, it's all updated, okay? So that's how I do external methods, and that's how I name them. When I want to make a library, I make a folder, and then in the top level of that folder, I will create an external module, usually with the same name as the folder, and then I will have my classes within it as well. It's good to have a module with the same name as the library, because then you can have extensions. So let's say I want to, what would be an example of how I could do it? Let's say I want to be able to manipulate an array of vectors, do something with an array of vectors. How about, what could we do to it? We could convert an array of vectors to a string. So let's just do that as an illustration. So if I make a method that says toString, and I will extend a vector array of mk vector, and it will return a string. I'm going to make it global. Now you might be thinking, oh, well, it's global. I thought you said make them protected when you have methods within a module. True, but actually extensions, I tend to find work better if they are global, because having a toString method, you'll be thinking, well, that's going to get confused, isn't it? It's not, because actually I'm extending a specific class that's within my library. So this toString extension will only be available on arrays of this type. So it's safe to have extensions as global. And so what I can do here is I can just, let's say we will iterate through each vector in the past array, and we will do, how we do this. So we need a string, so var string, and to each we will add v So we'll have x plus v dot x to string plus a comma plus y dot v dot y to string. There we go. Okay, and then we'll join them. String from array s. Okay, right. So now what I can do with this extension using this module, which is kind of cool, is I can say in my app.open event, I can say make an array bar a as mk vector, and we'll add a vector. Let's do new and we want them to be integers. Let's just add a couple. Okay, and then we'll turn it to string. Equals a to string. Break, and we should, hopefully, if we've done it right, yes, string. Oh, I know why. Didn't quite work, because in our constructor, we need to set the past variables to the instance variables. Okay, now try it. There we go. Okay, and that's another example of what, actually the benefits of external classes, because I just found that bug, fixed it, and now if I go back to project 2, I will find in the constructor that it's repaired. Okay, and the extension method is added as well. Okay, it's brilliant. Anyway, that's how I do it. There are probably other ways, but I have found this to be the most robust way of using external methods, external classes and modules in Xojo. I hope you found that useful. See you later.